After Justin Welby's comments on a recent podcast, some people are calling on him to resign. But should he? The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, appeared on a podcast called The Rest is Politics with Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart. Now, on the podcast, he was asked by Alistair Campbell, same question he was asked back in 2017 by Alistair Campbell on a GQ interview, which is gay sex sinful? Back then he said he really couldn't give a good answer, and so 2024, 7 years later, Alistair Campbell asked him that same very question, and here is what he said.
Let's now turn to gay sex.
I do all the time, really, in the life of the church.
And do you have a better answer yet?
Yes, I do.
I'd love to hear what it is.
What the Archbishop of York and I and the bishops, by a majority, by no means unanimous, and the church is deeply split over this, where we've come to is to say that all sexual activity should be within a committed relationship, and whether it's straight or gay. In other words, we're not giving up on the idea that sex is within marriage or civil partnership. We've put forward a proposal that where people have been through a civil partnership or a same-sex marriage, equal marriage under the 2014 Act, they should be able to come along to to a church and have a service of prayer and blessing for them in their lives together. So we accept that. Now, I think this is a long way from church same-sex marriage. But there is no doubt that the church is deeply, profoundly divided on this.
You personally haven't. Are you doing those blessings?
I've said I won't out of responsibility for the Anglican Communion, where in many parts of the world it's absolutely unacceptable.
And that's where you basically have to be a politician.
This is where you have to be a politician.
Because you've got very different views in very different churches around the world.
You have countries around the world where people, even if they don't have it, want the death penalty for people who, as they say, are gay. And it is a simple service of welcome and blessing. And even that has resulted in an enormous breakdown of relationships in a really sad way, not only across the communion, but in the Church of England. For those who are conservative, I am absolutely committed to them having a full and undoubted place in the Church of England. We're not a political party. We don't chuck out people who disagree, because it's God who brings people to faith.
So after that interview, and especially that clip which appeared on TikTok, there's been a lot of fallout. You can see by the headlines around me now, and that's just Christian newspapers. And there's been a lot of reaction to it. I'm going to pick up on 2 or 3 articles, but there was a statement issued by Lambeth Palace following up from the Archbishop of Canterbury's comments, or his answer to that question, which I'm sure was produced. Perhaps he got a lot of emails from people, and so this clarified even further. It didn't actually diffuse the situation, actually made things probably a bit more spicy, should we say. And the reason why, well, we'll get into that in a minute, but it's clarified where he now stands. Well, we all knew where Archbishop Justin stood. He voted back in February 2023 for prayers of love and faith, prayers of blessing for same-sex couples to happen in the General Synod. But since then, he hasn't voted. He's abstained from every vote. But on that first vote, he wanted it. Now this is just, clarification. He's actually stating where he stands on this issue. For us as Orthodox clergy, we look up to the 2 archbishops who are both liberal on this issue. It's not balanced out. We know that Archbishop Justin Welby is going to retire in January 2026. Well, that's the last date he can retire, because that's when he's 70. He might retire before. There's lots of speculation around that. But now there are two professing liberal archbishops in the Church of England. And so for those of us who hold to an orthodox view, we're seeing, and we'll see in these articles, that we have two archbishops who, as well as the Archbishop says, there's a majority in the House of Bishops, who are liberal on this, and so for us are not teaching the doctrine of the Church of England. So the first article I'm going to look at actually came out before the Lambeth Palace statement from Sir Fiso. Again, me butchering names, words, I think that's how that one's pronounced. So the blog by Dr. Reverend Ian Poole, in which Andrew Goddard writes, and Andrew Goddard actually is a theological educator, but he is also a priest in the Church of England. And the title is the Archbishop of Canterbury misleading everyone about the prayers of love and faith, which we is now known as PLF. So it says in a short TikTok clip of a forthcoming interview, which is now aired, with Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart, the Archbishop of Canterbury has revealed why the prayers of love and faith introduced under his leadership are causing so much damage to the Church of England. He was faced with a question alluding back to another interview with Campbell 7 years ago. Then Archbishop Welby could not offer a straight answer about is gay sex sinful. As he said, I know I haven't got a good answer. And so he said in November 2017, yes, I am copping out because I'm struggling with the issue. Asked if he had a better answer, he replied, yes, I do. So that's this interview now. Before joking that this was the sort of question Campbell would have been signalling to Blair to cut out of answering. And we just heard what he said, but I'll just remind you. He then said, what the Archbishop of York and I and the bishops, by a majority, by no means unanimous, and the Church is deeply split over this. Where we come to is to say that all sexual activity should be within a committed relationship, and whether it's straight or gay. In other words, we're not giving up on the idea that sex is within marriage or civil partnership. We put forward a proposal that where people have been through a civil partnership or a same-sex marriage, equal marriage under the 2014 Act, they should be able to come along to a church, because before I think he knew he was making a mistake there, to a church and have a service of prayer and blessing for them in their lives together. So we accept that. Now I think this is a long way from church same-sex marriage. And the thing is why he backtracked on the local church, because not all local churches are going to offer it, because those clergy which uphold the doctrine of the church and the teachings of the Bible are not going to do it. So they can't go to their local church. They have to go to perhaps the nearest church, who will do it. But Andrew Goddard says, in that 1 minute, there are 4 statements which are either misleading or demonstratively false about where the church stands and what has happened in the PLF process. The first question that he poses is, have bishops really said what the Archbishop claims? First, it is true that the Archbishop of York and Archbishop Justin himself have already made statements along these lines about sexual ethics. The Archbishop of York famously did so immediately after the proposed prayers were published in an interview on Radio 4's Sunday programme on the 22nd of January 2023. So this is before the vote at General Synod. And the interviewer said, can we just clarify one point? Is it still church teaching that gay sex is sin? And the Archbishop of York replied, well, what we are saying is that physical and sexual intimacy belongs in committed, stable, faithful relationships, and therefore, where we see a committed, stable, faithful relationship between two people of the same sex, we are now in a position where those people can be welcomed fully into the life of the church on their terms. Interviewer, and given a blessing, you don't bless sin, right? So you must be blessing something you believe to be good. Archbishop of York, as I say, we believe that stable, faithful, committed, loving relationships are good. They are the place for physical intimacy. In June 2023, Archbishop Welby said something similar to what he does in this interview. He said, I think we do need to be more open about the basic rules, the basic understanding of sexual morality within Christian thinking, without sounding as though we are lecturing, but just to be unapologetic about saying sexual activity should be within permanent, stable and faithful relationships of marriage, as that is understood in each society. Andrew Goddard says that the problem is that though the archbishops have said this, and many bishops probably agree with them, the bishops have never formally, even by a majority, decided or said that the church's teaching is that all sexual activity should be within a committed relationship, and whether it's straight or gay. In other words, we're not giving up on the idea that sex is within marriage or civil partnership. So it goes on to say, here the Archbishop is, unless this is yet another case of the bishops deciding something but keeping it secret, quite simply wrong and misleading Alistair Campbell and the viewers of the interview about what the bishops he leads have decided and publicly said and done. So that is the thing. It's never been publicly put out there, and like Andrew Goddard writes, unless it's been decided in secret. And there's been huge issues through General Synod and the House of Bishops with not seeing the legal advice that has been asked for time and time again by General Synod, and so there's a lot of distrust there and what's being said. The House of Bishops are now producing minutes where appropriate, apparently, of their meetings and trying to be more open, but there is a distrust. That's why that but keeping it secret statement comes from. But what is the teaching? What are they saying? Well, the Archbishop has now publicly come and said, do the House of Bishops now need to clarify where they stand, as he put them in a position where they now need to say where the House of Bishops stand. But Andrew Goddard goes on, what have the bishops actually said? So he says, secondly, and more seriously, we can be fairly sure there is no formal but secret episcopal agreement, because the House of Bishops has in fact said something quite different. At the time of those previous statements by the archbishops in the first half of 2023, there was a certain amount of unclarity as to what, as part of the PLF process, the bishops were going to say about the proper place of sex. It then, however, became clear that upholding the church teaching on marriage, as they were committed to do, meant this was a clear answer. This was not the better answer given by the Archbishop, but the answer the bishops have repeatedly given in multiple statements over recent years, through to the pastoral statement on civil partnerships in December 2019, in line with historic church teaching, which is itself understood to be based on Scripture and the teachings of Jesus. So it says the Church of England teaches that sexual intercourse as an expression of faithful intimacy properly belongs within marriage exclusively. Sexual relationships outside heterosexual marriage are regarded as falling short of God's purpose for human beings. And so in papers in General Synod in November 2023, it's clearly stated that by the House of Bishops that the Church's doctrine remains as set in Canon B 30, which is of holy matrimony. We have been clear that we have no intention of changing that doctrine. We also note that the Church's teaching on sexual relationships has been treated as part of the Church's doctrine on marriage. We are not proposing to change that teaching. And so you can already see the Archbishop of Canterbury is now saying something which has been contrary to what the House of Bishops has been saying, what's gone through General Synod, what's in the canons of the Church of England, and this is why there is some tension around what he has said. But this goes further. So as we were going through General Synod and the different papers were produced, they had the papers are set out of what General Synod were going to vote on, but they also had annexes in there explaining some of the different things, like the direction or the theology or the legal advice. And in one of those papers, the theological rationale is in Annex H. The bishops noted that the theological basis for the prayers, these are the prayers for the couples, were that they were a pastoral outworking for a time of uncertainty that respects the Church of England's unchanged doctrine on marriage, including the aspects of that doctrine that are concerned with sexual intimacy. On that basis, we have concluded that making the PLF available for same-sex couples without there being an assumption as to their sexual relationships would not be contrary to the doctrine of the Church of England. And this is, and I spoke about this before. So as a same-sex couple comes to a priest to ask for prayers of love and faith over them, the priest assumes that they're not having sexual intercourse and does not ask them about it as well. It's like just don't ask, don't tell type thing. And so by doing that, it's as a way of getting round that sex is, and affirming the doctrine of the Church of England that sexual intimacy, sexual intercourse is only within a marriage between a man and a woman. But if you don't ask that question, if you don't know that information, then you can get around it that way. But what if they disclose that? That's the question, or one of the questions, one of the many questions. If they disclose that, would you say, well, now I know that you're having sex, we can't do this because it's going against the doctrine of the Church of England? This article goes on, and so when the prayers were commended in December 2023, the pastoral guidance clearly stated on the very first page, the Church of England teaches that holy matrimony is a lifelong covenant between one man and one woman, blessed by God in creation and pointing to the love between Christ and the Church, a way of life which Christ makes holy. It is within marriage that sexual intimacy finds its proper place. So this is going to General Synod, and General Synod is the elected body. Well, you've got the House of Laity, which is elected. You've got the House of Clergy, which is elected. You've got the House of Bishops, which are not elected. They're there by right of being bishops. Not all the bishops, but the main bishops and some of the suffragan bishops, who are bishops that help them out in their diocese, as it were. And so this goes there, and their papers are presented, and they are read, they're debated, and they are voted on. So everything that's written in these papers, there's a lot of thought, and it goes in, and the right words are said. And remember, we are the established church. That means what goes through in canon law in the Church of England has to be ratified by Parliament, because we are the established church. So, we're very linked to Parliament here. So writing these things is serious. And so when they are written and produced, it's right that they can be pulled back and said, hey up, this is what... And the archbishops and the Archbishop of Canterbury were there at General Synod. I believe they were there for those debates. And Ricardo goes on, this means that not only is it wrong to say that the House of Bishops has said what the Archbishop claimed, they have instead said something quite different. They have in fact made that different statement the theological rationale and legal basis for the PLF, which frames the guidance that accompanies the prayers and which clergy should follow. It cannot be the case that the bishops are not giving up on the idea that sex is within marriage or civil partnership, because that has never been and still is not the Church's teaching. It also seems that expressing the teaching in those terms, unless marriage is now also being stretched by the Archbishop to include same-sex couples, he is rather oddly saying that he and the bishops are only permitting same-sex couples in civil marriages to be in a sexual relationship. This is despite the fact that although clergy have for many years been permitted to enter same-sex civil partnerships, the bishops are still required to ensure those civil partnerships are non-sexual. It is one thing to reject the Church's current teaching and engage in theological debate about an alternative. It's quite another to so do directly misrepresent that teaching, which is in fact recently being affirmed, particularly if you are an archbishop. And that is one thing in all this. Before we go on in the article, he is the archbishop. He was in the Anglican Communion, which represents 75 million Anglican Christians, the first among equals amongst the archbishops. He's no longer seen as the first among equals because of the prayers of love and faith amongst those archbishops, and the Anglican Communion is going to be rethought out about what it is, without Canterbury for the first time in its history being the first among equals. And so the Archbishop of Canterbury has got a hugely important role, and as we saw in that interview, he talks about that, and he says part of that role is political. So the fallout, not just in the Church of England, but in the Anglican Communion, because of his comments as well, will be taken really, really seriously. And we will see the statements come out from the other provinces about what he has said. So Goddard then goes on to ask, who are the prayers of love and faith for? Thirdly, although not as clear or serious a misrepresentation of the Church of England's position, it is also misleading to emphasise, particularly in the context of the statement about the Church's sexual ethics, supposedly being focused on marriage or civil partnership status, that the PLF proposal is that where people have been through a civil partnership or same-sex marriage, equal marriage under the 2014 Act, they can now confer service. The bishops were again quite clear and emphatic in putting this proposal to General Synod last November, that the material contained in the PLF resource section intentionally does not differentiate between couples who have and who have not entered into civil same-sex marriage. That is because the PLF resource is being offered for the purposes explained in the previous paragraph. They are not being offered to be used as a thanksgiving for marriage or a service of prayer and dedication after civil marriage, and do not refer to or take account of a couple's civil marriage status. It would appear that this point was of significance in the unpublished legal advice concerning whether or not using the prayers for couples in same-sex marriages was contrary or indicative of a departure from the Church's doctrine in any essential matter. We are told that the legal advice we received set out both sides of the argument, though not given the details of the two arguments. And then it goes on. In the light of the legal and theological advice we have received, we consider the following points to be significant. The PLS resource section does not treat those couples who have entered a same-sex civil marriage any differently from the way they treat a same-sex couple who are in a civil partnership and who have not acquired any formal civil status for their relationship. The use of PLF resource section for a couple who have entered into a same-sex civil marriage does not therefore imply that their civil status is something that the Church considers distinguishes the couple from other same-sex couples who do not wish to dedicate their life together to God. And so he finally finishes up, what do the prayers of love and faith offer? Fourthly, the Archbishop spoke of a couple in a legally recognised same-sex union being able to come along to a church, and have a service of prayer and blessing for them in their lives together. And he says, as I said, the correction from the local to a church was important because it's down to the local parish priest. But he says, first, at present, there cannot be a service for a couple, only prayers within a regular service. And this is unlikely to change until midway through next year. And this is the thing. The prayers can only be used at the moment within, say, an evening prayer service or a Holy Communion service as part of the prayers of that service. There is no stand-alone service. So in a sense, the Archbishop is speak about the future, but there's still work to go through General Synod in February and July to get there. So in a one way, the only service that they can do is within the prayers of a service, not a standalone service. And he says, secondly, and more seriously, the argument that led to such standalone services being accepted at July Synod was that they were really liturgically no different from what is now currently permitted in terms of the use of the prayers in regular services. In other words, any such service would be a service of the Word or a service of Holy Communion, a form of service already authorised under Canon B2 for use in the Church, and so not needing any further synodical scrutiny or authorisation. To describe the service as in fact a service of prayer and blessing for them is either false or is proof that the argument for which was presented to Synod to justify introducing standalone services next year by commendation and not as previously proposed and supported by the Archbishop by Canon B2 was duplicitous. So, and this is the thing. So they're saying, they're only prayers for the couple. It's not a service, as it were, by its own definition, but by the Archbishop saying in that interview that they were a service of prayer and blessing for them, as Andrew Goddard said, is either false or is proof that the argument which was presented to justify standalone services by commendation. So any change in liturgy has to go through General Synod, and it has to be voted through 2/3 of each house to get through. And this, to do with the same-sex blessings, would not get through. They haven't got enough numbers in the General Synod. The House of Bishops know this. So they're saying it's going through by commendation. It's going through commendation because really the standalone services are not what people are thinking they're going to be, which they are. They're going to be standalone services. They're going to be, there's no direction of what they are allowed or not allowed to wear. So you can have two women coming in wedding dresses, and these prayers being said in such a way that it very much looks and feels like a wedding, that if people were walking past, they would just think it is a wedding. And so the standalone services are perceived to be a change of doctrine, which means it needs to go through Canterbury too, and to have the 2/3 vote. By saying, well, no, they're not like that, the House of Bishops then can commend the prayers. It doesn't go through any vote whatsoever, and says, the service is not what you're thinking. Actually, they're just prayers for the couple. But saying this is a particular service of prayer and blessing, as he said, is duplicitous. So Andrew Goddard says, and he doesn't hold back on this in his conclusion, everything that the Archbishop said regarding PLOF, apart from the church is deeply split over this, is demonstrably either false or misleading, unless the previous explanations and commitments offered by him and the bishops to General Synod are false and misleading. So the Archbishop's being misleading, or General Synod, the House of Bishops to General Synod are being misleading. It says the Archbishop's interview gives the impression that the Church of England, with the agreement of the majority of bishops, now teaches that sexual relationships, including same-sex sexual relationships, are acceptable as long as the couple are in a committed relationship, either civil, partnership or marriage. Furthermore, he claims that the Church of England will provide a service of prayer and blessing in church for couples in such relationships. And it's not at all like that. At all. Sex is only and upheld, as previously stated, by the House of Bishops and General Synod, that sexual intercourse is for marriage between a man and a woman. And so he says, in fact, the theological argument presented by the bishops and cite of the legal advice to bishops might demonstrate that this is also crucial for PLF's legality, has been that any sexual relationships other than marriage between a man and a woman is contrary to the Church's teaching of doctrine of marriage. Despite this, it has nevertheless been claimed by the majority of bishops that any committed same-sex couple, with or without legal status, can be offered PLF as prayers within an existing authorised liturgy. This is even though it is also acknowledged that because their relationship may be sexual, such prayers are indicative of a departure from the Church's doctrine. And that's where it falls down. If they are in a sexually active relationship, the priest at that point of finding that out will say we can't do this because it's going away from the doctrine of the Church of England. But what the Archbishop of Canterbury is now saying is, it's permissible in one way or another, and that's why there's this fallout coming. So Andrew Goddard says the Archbishop answer might have been better in the sense of probably being more appealing to Alistair Campbell. It is, however, in fact so highly misleading and inaccurate to suggest a disturbing level of combination of ignorance, misrepresentation, dishonesty and inaccuracy on the Archbishop's part in his account of the Church's recent decisions, its doctrine and its stated rationale for PLF. Our dire situation as a church is bad enough as a result, having been so divided because of the direction set out by the archbishops and most of the bishops. The fact that there are such deep theological disagreements on these matters, they need to be addressed, cannot and must not be avoided. However, such significant erroneous statements as these for no less the Archbishop of Canterbury, unless swiftly followed up by an apology or correction, can only add further to the widespread erosion of trust and growing sense of disbelief, betrayal, deception, anger and despair now fall across much of the Church of England in relation to both PLF process and our episcopal leadership. Doesn't hold back. Well, that was written just a few days before Lambeth Palace issued a statement, which they did. So that was written on the 15th of October. On the 22nd, this statement came out from Lambeth Palace, from the Archbishop of Canterbury, and it says, Since the beginning of the living and loving faith process, people across the Church of England have been studying, praying and sharing together about sexuality, identity, relationships and marriage. That process has revealed profound differences in theological conviction and biblical interpretation. But that does not change the fact that every group and every Christian has a place in the Church of England. Again, you can't hold two doctrines like this within the same church. So one doctrine, sex is only to be had between a man and woman within a marriage, and another doctrine saying no, sex can be between anybody, two men, two women, to a man and a woman within a civil union, a marriage, and those hold those to be true. That you can't hold those both to be true. So every Christian, they can find a place in the Church of England, but it's a very confusing place. But the statement goes on. In his interview on the leading podcast, the Archbishop of Canterbury was asked whether gay sex is sinful. Alistair Campbell was returning to the question put to the Archbishop in 2017. In both interviews, Archbishop Justice spoke honestly about the fact that these are complex questions that has caused deep division in the Church. In both interviews, he said that what seemed most central to him are stable, committed and faithful relationships. But it's not about stable, committed and faithful relationships. It's about what God has taught us and what is the doctrine of the Church. And again, that sexual intercourse, sexual intimacy is only to be had within a marriage between a man and a woman, not stable, committed and faithful relationships between anyone. But the statement goes on. Archbishop Justin was given a personal view that reflects on the position now held by himself, the Archbishop of York and many other bishops regarding sexual intimacy. He has been honest that his thinking has evolved over the years through much prayer and theological reflection, particularly through the living and loving faith process, and he now holds this view sincerely. It reflects his commitment to continuing to welcome, love and include LGBTQ plus people more fully into the life of the Church. Now it's his personal review, and it reflects the positions of the Archbishop and many other bishops regarding sexual intimacy. So the statement is now trying to correct what was said on the podcast. But here, I see this, and many of you I know see this. He has been honest that his thinking has evolved over the years through much prayer and theological reflection. The Bible, not just in the verses that talk about this, but in other arguments in the Bible on different theological issues and how Paul deals with them as well in some of his letters and how they are dealt with in some of the letters. That we cannot change doctrine in our own mind. It is what it is. We accept it or we don't. But to evolve our thinking and change our thinking and changing our interpretation of the Bible is dangerous, because what you have to do is then you have to, in one way, justify through prayer and through theological reflection how you got there, but other people who have got a contrary view haven't. What's God said to you? What have you learned? Where do you see this now being permissible in the Word of God, where we can't see it? And this is a difficulty with this. Yes, compassion and pastorally, we have to love and include LGBTQ plus people in the church. We want them to come into the church. But as with all of us who come to church, we don't stay as we are. We come to know Christ. We give our lives over to him, say that he is Lord, confess that he died on the cross for our sins, and we change those things which are contrary to the teaching of God. We all do it. We all have to do it. We all have to leave those past lives behind and live a new life for Christ. And so no one should be excluded from that opportunity of coming to Christ and being part of the church. But we can't be fully the people that we were. We have to change some of those things. And so this is part of this through the evolve. some things, yes, I will admit, evolve. Thinking evolves, and we might see things in the Bible differently, but not the doctrine. The doctrines of the Bible, the commandments of the Bible that God has given us, they don't change because they're from God. And so I always find it quite a slippery slope of how theological doctrine can evolve and change. But it says in the statement, however, there is no consensus among the bishops on this question, and the church remains deeply divided, and even now more divided. Archbishop Justin stressed his absolute commitment to those who hold a traditional view of having a full and undoubtable place in the Church of England. Just to stop there on that bit, is like his absolute commitment to those who hold a traditional view of having a full and undoubtable place in the Church of England. I find it interesting why that statement is even there. Why does that need to be there? Because yes, we feel threatened. Of course we do, and we hear stories about what's been happening, and those stories, to be honest, need to get out so people do hear what has been happening to those who hold an orthodox view and have not and had difficulties with that in different circumstances. And I tell you what, if you've got a story, email me at my email address down below. I'll keep it confidential, but let's build up some of these stories. Let's understand, and where appropriate, I'll and with permission, I'll speak about them in future videos, because this needs to be said. Because here, in one way or another, is an acknowledgement that there is something happening here, or there is definitely a feeling in the minimal sense. So he holds an absolute commitment to those who hold a traditional view having a full and undoubted place in the Church of England, unless he's talking about those who want to leave, that they would leave the Church of England. Why, if the doctrine of the Church of England is what I've said many times in this video, if that's the doctrine of the Church of England, and the ones who uphold the doctrine, why wouldn't it be undoubted that we have a place? We are not the ones who are changing our thoughts on this. We're not the ones who are saying the Bible's wrong on this, and we are still upholding the doctrine of the Church of England as it is right at this second. It's those who are saying, no, that doctrine's wrong and this is how it should be, and evolve their thinking on it, who are leaving the doctrine of the Church of England, not us. So a full and undoubted place in the Church of England. Thank you so much. You know, that I'm sure all the conservative, traditional evangelicals and Anglo-Catholics are really pleased that our rightful place is you got our backs, an absolute commitment. Thank you. His answer does not indicate a change of teaching of the House of Bishops. This is an ongoing conversation across the church, and Archbishop Justin hopes that the bishops, together with clergy and laity, will keep praying and reflecting on these questions. There isn't praying and reflecting, we know where we are. So coming from an article from The Spectator, as we move on in this, from Jamie Franklin of Irreverent Podcast, writes, he writes about the stuff I've spoken about, but he gets onto a further twist in the tale, and again, link for this down below. He says, a statement from Lambeth Palace, specifically about Welby's appearance on the rest of politics. The statement itself is disingenuous. What it could have and should have said is that Welby was wrong to have attributed his personal view on this matter to the majority of bishops, and give the impression that the church has changed its teaching or intends to change its teaching. Then it could have said that he'd made a mistake and he's sorry. But it doesn't say that. Instead it says Archbishop Justin was given a personal view that reflects a position now held by himself, the Archbishop of York, and many other bishops regarding sexual intimacy. The problem is that on the rest of his politics, he did not say he was given just a personal view. It might have been what he meant, but it's not what he said. And to imply that it was what was said is dishonest. The statement goes on, there is no consensus among the bishops on this question. That may be true, but it is not what Welby said on the podcast. He said that the majority of bishops share his view. The word consensus means a generally accepted opinion, which obviously implies a majority. Why not instead just apologise and said, I misspoke? Again, it's so sad because the interview is mostly good and Welby came across as relaxed, knowledgeable and insightful. That's why it's so galling to be left feeling once again that folks in the Church of England are being gaslit and lied to by our leaders. And he finishes with some adverbs from the Master. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. Any more than this comes from evil. Matthew 5:37. And that's the thing. You know, you are doing an interview. I do it on here. I probably, if I watch this back, I think, well, why did I say that? Because you're thinking at the time, you're going through, you're reacting to, you know, like I do. I react to articles, and I'll say, and sometimes, you know, I might catch it and edit it out, and sometimes they're there, and I have to, you know, I would go, I got that wrong. Of course, you do that in interviews, and so. What Jamie Franklin is saying here is, you know, if you just got it wrong, but you know, I have seen on forums online that I'm on that some people have been gracious and said, well, you know, he is doing an interview and you will get things wrong, but the thought process on, as he said, he's put a lot of prayer and theological reflection into sexual ethics in the church as regarding prayers and love and faith and things like that. So he knows where his thoughts are. He is the head of the House of Bishops. He is the head of the Church of England, and so he knows where they are. And so, how gracious are we in saying that he might have made a mistake, or this is how things really are? And as Andrew Goddard said, there's stuff going on there that we just don't know, and the truth isn't coming out. And that's what it feels like. Andrew Goddard and Jamie Franklin, and I'll put myself in there as well now, have doubts about the integrity of this, and is this going through, and it's going to be different to what they were presenting, because what they're saying to us is being different. And for the Archbishop of Canterbury to go onto a big podcast with two big presenters and to say these things, you know, the words that aren't taken lightly, and to put a statement out, as Jamie Franklin said, you know, you could have just apologised and said I got it wrong, but didn't. So evangelicals now said, well, we should resign. They said you should be resigning, and people out there, you go on X and you'll see people saying you have to resign now. That's it. You can't just say all this and think that's it. So they say this week the Archbishop of Canterbury rode roughshod over 2 millennia of established Christian theology to boldly declare, indeed recklessly, that sex could take place with his happy approval within a committed relationship, whether marriage or civil, gay or straight. And so that article goes on, and that includes the statement that they said, and they concur with me, finally his statement that conservative believers, Orthodox Anglicans, have a full and undoubted place in the Church of England is absurd. Of course they do. And the fact that he even says they needs to say such words reveals the surreal state he and other bishops seem to have themselves into. At the same time, what weight can be given to his words when the House of Bishops have actually done its best to shut its ears to the concerns of such Anglicans? So there you have it, a bit of a meaty video there on the Archbishop. But is his position now tenable with what he is saying and his position? And whatever happens, if he resigns or he announces his retirement, we know, as I said, he will retire at least by January 2026. Who will the next Archbishop of Canterbury be? If we know that we have a liberal Archbishop of York, surely the Archbishop of Canterbury should be orthodox on these. They should balance each other out. That should be the only fair thing. Will that happen? I don't think so. I doubt it very much. The majority of the House of Bishops are liberal on this issue, and more likely there will be an Archbishop of Canterbury who will be like the Archbishop of Canterbury now, fully supportive of this. That will continue church division. We have the Alliance trying to do their work to support us, but we have to see. We have to see what happens. But Archbishop Welby's comments at the moment, as the headlines have said, have just brought more division to the church, and will deepen those divisions over the next few months, and then we'll have to see what happens at General Synod.